Hi, I'm Saxa Mullins and I'm a survivor. Tonight we're here to talk about sexual violence and consent. In 2013, I was assaulted in Sydney's King's Cross. My search for justice ended after 2 trials, 2 appeals, an acquittal and no resolution for me. Coming out of a 4-year ordeal with no closure left me feeling dejected, untethered and determined to tell my story. I did not give consent, but the court found there was the mistaken belief that consent was given. I was labelled an unreliable witness to my own story. My case triggered a landmark review of sexual assault laws and reignited an ongoing conversation. The momentum we're seeing right now brings me hope that real, lasting change will come from this, and that survivors will no longer have to lay their trauma bare to be heard. Welcome to Q&A.
Hi there and welcome to the program. Tonight we're bringing you an important conversation with many voices. In the room tonight we have survivors, students, parents, educators and experts. And for her brilliant opening of the show, would you please give a round of applause to Saxa Mullins. Saxon is going to be joining the conversation a little later on, and joining me on the panel tonight, broadcaster and author Yumi Stynes, who's about to publish a book on consent. Associate Professor of Criminology at the University of New South Wales, Michael Salter. Principal of Sydney's Wenona School, Dr Briony Scott. Former NRL player and mental health advocate Joe Williams. And 2021's Youth Influencer of the Year, among many other things, Yasmin Poole. Please make all of them feel welcome.
Police Commissioner Michael Fuller, in my home state today, announced a proposed app to register consent. Michael Salter, do you think that this will help achieve higher rates of sexual assault convictions, or is it actually just circling around the problem without actually targeting it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And this was a tough one from the Commissioner, and I'm not sure that this start-up is probably going to fly. You know, consent is a really complex issue. It is a complex process. It is not obviously ticking a box. It's not swiping left on an app. And I think, as you know, the Commissioner's intentions were obviously good, and he sort of went on to emphasise the importance of positive consent and affirmative consent, where we take action in order to obtain consent from a partner. But, you know, no, consent is not just a procedural, legal tick box exercise. It's something that we need to really think about very carefully.
Yumi?
It stinks. I mean, it's a terrible idea. And anybody who's ever been assaulted or has even been sort of edged and pushed into something knows this is a bad idea. If you can be coerced into sex, you can easily be coerced into ticking a box or swiping on an app.
In Denmark, though, they do have an app called I Consent. They've also got laws there requiring provable, explicit consent before a sexual act, and similar laws in Sweden have actually led to an increase, a 75% increase in rape convictions. Is it that stupid an idea?
I think it seems to be squashing down the conversation about how consent needs to be ongoing. So by kind of intimating that you can swipe and then that's solved and then you can go ahead and it's a free-for-all, that's a pretty dangerous idea, because you need to keep checking in with people saying, is this okay? Things might change from what you expected, or you might change yourself and go, you know what, I'm not into it anymore. And if it's there, provable, then you might feel like, oh, God, I've signed my life away.
I'm stuck with this. Yasmin, how did you receive that suggestion from a police commissioner?
I think there's this thing with, to be honest, leaders, when they seem to see big issues. We saw the COVID Safe app, and now we're seeing an app proposed for something as serious as rape and sexual assault. And, you know, clearly his intentions were good, but this is an example of why we should be centering and listening to survivors, and also using evidence-based approach, because this is too serious for us to suddenly throw ideas at a wall and hope that it sticks. So, you know, there's so many issues with this app that I can't even begin. The first is, you know, what if somebody's intoxicated? What if there's a power imbalance? So ultimately, again, it's let's centre the lived experience of survivors and ensure that we're actually following the evidence. This is not the time to make up new ideas.
This is to all the panellists. What age should consent training take place? And is there such thing as being too young for consent training?
Yumi, how do you do this with your kids?
So Dr. Melissa Kang, who's here, Dolly Doctor, and I wrote a book about consent. And we agonised over the age level and how to kind of lay it in stone, which is kind of what you're asking now. Please give me a set age when we can have this conversation. The beauty of kids, because I do have 4 of my own, is that if it's too graphic or gross or just too adult, they do just tune out. And I think people are so worried about the danger of giving them too much information. Information is a gift, and that is the gift that parents should be giving their kids. If it's too much, they apply their own filters, they censor it themselves. And I think we've got to get in there with the conversations before the puberty hormones start mucking with their brains.
But you talk to the little ones about things like tickling,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Just explain that.
So, well, tickling's a great example because it's touch, it's intimate, it's fun, just like sex. And it's usually done between people who know each other, which is like sex as well. And there's always a point with a kid where they start to go, I'm kind of hating this. I'm terrified. I'm going to vomit. I'm going to pee myself. And they want to call stop, but a lot of their body language is confusing because they also seem to be enjoying themselves. So in those instances, that's a really good opportunity for the people who are doing the tickling, which is generally a carer or an older person, to say, do you want me to stop? And then realise that the kid actually has agency over their body, and if they say stop, you'll listen. Another thing that you can do is apply a safe word, which seems so adult because it's a BDSM kind of term, but it's really useful and kids are into it. So with mine, we say eggplant or pineapple. And if I'm tickling them, they might shout stop, 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 but they're doing it, and I think that they might want to keep going. So if they say pineapple, I know for sure that that's a timeout. Yeah. And a safe word conversation in a sexual context is really good because it means that at the start of an intimate encounter, you're already talking about consent and setting something up that gives you an escape hatch.
Yasmin, do you remember how old you were when at school the serious bits of these conversations started to happen? Did you have them?
I was never taught about consent. I did receive sex education around year 11, but I remember even vividly at 14 years old being made to feel uncomfortable. And my response to that in my head, and I remember it, I said, boys will be boys. And I repeated it to myself, boys be boys, boys be boys. And I don't know where I got that from. I didn't get it from my parents. I didn't get it from the school. I didn't get it from my peers. But somehow I needed something to justify me feeling uncomfortable. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I certainly think it needs to happen earlier. But I also think there's a nuanced and deeper conversation that it isn't just about consent, it's about power. And we need to also be teaching our kids about power. Because I was reading Chanel's petition to call for consent education at a younger age. Young girls were sharing how they woke up mid-rape, you know, and they'd wake up and notice that their underwear was stained with blood, right? That's happening right now to young women in Australia. So yes, let's teach consent, but let's also encourage young men to reflect upon that sense of entitlement, of power, of the way that women's position in society is often reduced. You know, what triggers that as well? So there's also a deeper conversation here about, I guess, structural inequality that we also need to have.
With just a 1% conviction rate in sexual assault matters that are reported to police, why is it that we keep encouraging survivors to come forward and report to police when really the price they pay is loss of family, friends, career, finances, your mental and physical health, too often deteriorating into self-harm and suicide?
Saxon, you now work in advocacy. Do you tell people when they come forward, yes, it's worth reporting, yes, go through this process?
I do get that question a lot. And it is I guess I try and gauge how that survivor is feeling. It's really personal to every survivor what they see as justice. You know, some people might not even consider going to the police or going through the court system. So, you know, that's totally off the table from the word go. But it's really about judging what each survivor feels is justice. But if someone asks me, is it worth going through the policing process, the court process, I don't know that I can be a massive advocate for it because like you said, it's a brutal system. I think if we implement some of those changes that Michael was talking about, that will go some of the way to helping it. But we need a full-scale reform of all of those responses.
Just as an individual, I think most people can never know what you went through. How close does it come to breaking you?
I don't think it comes close. I think it just does.
I'm really very sorry to hear that, Saxon. Thank you for sharing with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Sumed Kundu's got a question about schools.
Hi. So the events of the past few weeks have been concerning to me as a high school student. And coming from a boys' high school, I've seen firsthand the patriarchal and elitist attitude that can be formed in such environments. In my opinion, boys would be able to communicate better with women and girls in a co-ed environment. So is there really a need for single-sex schools in the 21st century, and what role do they have to play in consent?
Do you think there's a role for them?
I think they do, but it's a very limited role.
Yeah, OK. Briony, Scott, you run
Didn't see this one
a
coming.
single-sex school.
Firstly, I just want to say to Saxon, it's amazing to listen to the strength with which you tell your testimony. And I deal with peer-on-peer assault at the young level. And, you know, at that level, your main goal is to triage and make sure that people are actually OK and they're going to live, right? Because young people tend to go very black and white. And all, you know, and it's like my life is over, and we are there going, there is always a third way. There is always, it's never yes or no. It's always, we will look after you. And so you're not always looking to get them into the court system. You're looking to keep them alive. And if they're 14, they may not at that point be able to do anything or want to do anything, but at 24 they may. And so you want to be able to strengthen them so they get to 24 and they think about it again. And at 34, they might be thinking differently, and 44 again. But the whole Me Too movement, where you're seeing women in their 30s and 40s and 50s going, it's enough. What we're trying to do is get them early so they don't have to go through their entire life carrying this burden alone. It's an extraordinary strength.
To Kundu's question...
I'm going to defend my school because it's a raging feminist boot camp. And so all of these issues that we're talking about, we talk domestic violence, we talk about power. What do you do when your boss puts his hand on your knee? How do you ask for a pay rise? What do you do when someone's throwing a temper tantrum at you? What do you do if you're cornered in the back?
Let's get real. He's talking about boys' schools here. This is what he's talking about.
The interesting thing is it all depends on the leadership, right? So you can have people in co-ed, it's a co-ed world, right? And I like, how is that working for all of us? We all need to step up here, and we can look at communities and go, oh, that particular school's really bad, or this particular, you know. And I'm like, no, we just stop. We have a problem. We have a real problem across our society. And the question now is, what are the leaders doing about it? So the leaders of schools, the leaders of sporting groups, the leaders of our national government, you know, what are they doing? And I can tell you the testimony of young people is just dismissed. So you can have 2 alleged allegations of rape, both one historical and one not, in National Parliament, and there's a review within 2 days. We can have 1,500, 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 testimonies of adolescents, and we're still waiting for some demonstrable evidence of action. So
what's the action you want?
Oh, you want to know?
Yeah.
Okay. So, first thing I want is I need the adults to stop acting like children so that the children don't have to keep acting like adults. Because at the moment, it's being driven by young people. First thing. The second thing I want is the Australian Human Rights Commission to come in and look at adolescents across the board. I don't care where they go to school. I don't care how much alcohol they drank. I don't care what postcode they lived in. I want them to come up with specific recommendations that I think we should implement. And I don't mean this so disrespectfully to government, although it may come across this way. I don't want to wait for them to make a decision as to whether they'll implement recommendations or not. I think the responsibility is on adults in our society to step up and make the changes that we need to make that will make them happen, because if we leave it to government, it will never happen. So, you want to keep going?
Yeah.
I'm a principal, I can go on forever. So I look at this and I think the leadership matters, and that comes to all of us. You cannot hold young people to a higher standard than we're prepared to hold ourselves to. Now, whether I work in a single sex, I work in boys' schools, girls' schools, co-ed schools, honestly, the human heart is the same. The issue now is how do we lead out of this?
OK, Patria is a school girl. You're in, I think, year 11, is that right? 12. Year 12 in Sydney. Do you think Briony's squibbing it a bit on the boys' schools question? Do you think that there's an issue there?
I'd like to acknowledge that consent needs to be taught in all spheres of society, regardless of age, what school do you go to.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is the number of girls who've been assaulted by a boy who goes to a single-sex school exceeds the amount of fingers and toes that I have. And I think this is plausible evidence that there is an indoctrinating toxic culture in boys' schools. And I think it doesn't necessarily begin with the boys, but it begins with the environment that they're presented in. And I think it also starts from the fact that they don't have access to girls on a daily basis. They are with
How
boys.
do you think these boys see girls at your school, girls like you?
Honestly, I think we're seen as objects and as conquests. We're not people who you want to be friends with. It's simply, oh, who did you kiss on that night? Oh, who's that? You know, degrading women, using it as a topic of conversation to unite boys instead of actually wanting to be friends with them and more like form meaningful friendships. I feel like there's just a bit of, you know, a bit of divide there. And I have a brother who goes to a single-sex school, and I'm concerned that he's in a culture where he's exposed to that sort of behaviour and that sort of indoctrination where toxic masculinity is empowered instead of disempowered.
She's right, isn't she, Briony?
I'm not going to argue with anyone's opinion on that, and that's her experience. I get that, I really do. The challenge that I have is that when we did the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Abuse, we went, it's not everywhere. It's just in this pocket. It would never be in the church, you know, and, oh, look, it's in the church. And then you look at domestic violence and it would never be happening in the high SES, you know, wealthy families. And you go, oh, look at that, it's in wealthy families, you know. And I look at this and I go, yes, it has absolutely come to the surface through the independent schools and the single-sex schools, but we are delusional. It is willful blindness to think that it ends there. The Human Rights Commission have already done this through the army and they've found it rampant through there. They've done it in the hospitality industry. They've done it through there. It is a problem, and this doesn't actually lessen anything that you're saying, but I want to add to it and go, yes, I hear that, and if there's poor leadership in this area, you will absolutely see that behaviour.
Joe?
I've got to say I'm someone who went to an all-boys school from 7 to 10, and then I went to 11 and I went to a co-ed school, and what we found is that boys couldn't integrate with girls in normal friendships, and to the point where we started actually having parties with just the boys because we found it uncomfortable to talk to girls in any type of friendship type setting. Now, looking back at that, I thought it was completely normal at the time, but looking back, it's super toxic to the point where we can't have open and honest conversations with girls as mates. And you're right, you know, looking at how some boys' schools sit, you're looking at a guy who went to a boys' school, a guy who played in the NRL. A lot of the time, unfortunately, females are seen as objects. And it's super toxic, and that's the sort of stuff.
So where does it come from? You were in that environment. Where does that emerge from?
I think it's taught. I'm someone who now I do a lot of work specialising in people's behaviours, and every single person here tonight is a product of their own conditioning and their own upbringing. So the stuff that we see and how we act now as adults is stuff that we've been taught and stuff that we've been conditioned to believe is normal. So what we need to do is start to have these conversations with our boys at young ages, talk about consent, talk about respect before consent, about people and respecting people's views and you know, yes and no. And, you know, I talk to my 6-year-old boy now about respecting his 3-year-old sister. She stands over him, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, like I'm super grateful that my 2 daughters at the age of 3, almost 4, and 14, almost 15, that they are fierce young girls, because I am super scared of the as we call it, toxic masculinity in society that we have. My girls will be able to stick up for themselves.
I want to get around the panel, but Patria, so you made the point that it's about boys' schools. Briony says this is a broader thing. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's just a particular brand of toxic masculinity that's coming out of these schools? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily, because I think that toxic masculinity is everywhere, whether you go to a boys' school or not. It's just an ingrained part of our culture, which is not good, of course, but it's just kind of the way it is, and hopefully we can change that. But I do think that when boys are with each other constantly, every day, for 7 hours, there's going to be some patterns that form and there's going to be behaviours. And I think that you know, of course, it's not all boys, but when you put boys together, it does rub off onto other boys. And we live in a society where peer pressure and staying silent is prevalent. And so what are boys supposed to do when that's the, you know, society that they're conditioned in?
I imagine you're talking about these consent issues amongst your school peers. Do you ever have those conversations with boys from the boys' schools?
Look, that conversation has been limited. I have tried, but boys do get very protective when speaking about this, and I think they perceive that we are attacking them when really it should be diplomatic conversation where both parties are heard, and about integrating and hearing both perspectives while also making sure that women are empowered, because the fact of the matter is 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted, which means that technically 1 in 5 men are the sexual assaulter. So there needs to be a conversation where both parties are heard, and to move forward to break a cycle that is clearly, you know, trapping us, and to like overcome that, I guess.
Patria Havardis.
Hi. After the March for Justice protest, the Prime Minister said that protesters not being met with bullets is a triumph for democracy. Do you agree?
So they weren't exactly his words, but I think we all understand the point. Yasmin, do you agree with the Prime Minister's message?
Actually, I think it's a fundamental flaw in our democracy if young women can't go to Parliament and not be raped. I think that's a fundamental, and be raped, that's a fundamental actual problem in our democracy. So I'm not thankful for not being shot. I'm furious. I am angry that any young woman that desires or aspires to go into politics now will have to think twice. That is appalling, and that is a shame on our democracy. So to think that the Prime Minister couldn't have the backbone to even get out there and speak to all the protesters, thousands of women wearing black in mourning, to think that he could hide away in his office and then make those kind of statements is something that sits so wrong with me, because my work, the majority of my work has been encouraging young women to put their hands up and run. And for the first time, I had to think, will they be safe? Will they be safe in 2021 in Australia? Will their bodies and bodily autonomy be respected?
You were at the rally in Canberra. You obviously maybe have some political aspirations. What did you think? What did you think looking at the building that you were once so excited to go and visit as a schoolgirl?
Right, yeah. I remember when I was 12 and I went on my first school trip to Parliament, and I looked at it in awe. And I thought, these are the highest leaders in Australia. Look at the change that we can make. And I felt the weight of change inside of me. And yet that time, we were marching, again, side by side with women wearing black, you know, mourning the stories of Briony, the stories of the women that stepped forward, some that even are not around to tell their story now. So to me, it was a big marker of this endemic culture of violent misogyny, even in the highest political institution, that has existed not just right now, for generations, perhaps even since the beginning of Parliament. So I think I'm continuing to encourage young women. We need that critical mass at the end of the day. We need women to be heard. But what does it say when we're fearing, you know, whether women will even be treated and kept safe? That's insane to think about, but it's the reality.
Joe.
I don't think for 1 minute we should be shocked to hear certain comments. When this country, going to be confronting words here, but this country was founded on this sort of stuff. With the raping and bashing of black and brown women for a couple of centuries. So and that comes from the highest establishment of what we call Australia. We need to demand better when it comes to this sort of stuff. We can't be surprised. As I said, it's been happening, and Aboriginal women have been calling this sort of stuff for many, many years. We need to start to listen and collectively as a country do better. You know, I can't help but think, and just sitting here and hearing the different questions and even responses, a lot of it has been centred around what the victim should do. We need to stop men raping women. not what victims should be doing in this sort of situation. We need to empower and encourage and support victims to all ends, but we need to stop men from doing the wrong things.
And can I just add with this story of everything that's been happening in Parliament, the one person that no longer works in Parliament is Briony Higgins. Why on earth has no politician that was involved in this been fired or had to leave? I mean, that's, again, that example of one brave woman stepping forward, and you see how those in power close ranks. The lying cow comment, the looking into the background of her partner, even this comment about trial by media. You know, these are all putting the onus back on survivors and punishing survivors. So just like you said, it's demanding accountability, and that's something we're not seeing.
Though? The question about why would somebody like Saxon Mullins, Briony Higgins, the deceased woman who accused the Attorney General, Grace Tame, why would they report? Why, when it's so thankless and horrible? Because, Saxon, when I saw you step up and tell your story on national television that was so raw and harrowing and painful to you, what you did was you lit a fire in me. And I felt it go through my sisters, through our mothers, through women all over the country, and we're on fire now, and we're thankful to you. So you didn't get the court justice that you wanted, but we're going to keep fighting, and we're not going to give up.
So, on that note, please thank our panel, our wonderful panel. Yumi Stynes, Michael Salter, Briony Scott, Joe Williams and Yasmin Poole. Please thank all. And you can save your biggest round of applause for Saxon Mullins and the wonderful people in the audience who've asked questions and shared stories tonight. Thank you. Next week, we're in Melbourne, asking how we can design a better, more equal world when it comes to gender, to race and to wealth. We're bringing together a panel of big and bold thinkers, including the author Bruce Pascoe, the broadcaster Stan Grant, economist Thomas Piketty and Gigi Foster, and journalist Adam Crichton. We'll see you then. Good night.